Welcome, everyone. We invite for you to join us on social media as we follow along through this conversation. Please tweet any thoughts, questions, or comments you may have using the hashtag Learning Tuesdays, and we'll be sure to retweet. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this webinar. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. We would love for you to introduce yourself using the chat box. We invite for you to post any questions you may have during the Q&A into the Q&A box, as we'll be dedicating some time at the end to respond to those questions. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. The recording, as well as any resources you see shared in the presentation and in the chat, will be shared in a follow-up email. And finally, we invite for you to take the brief poll that will be posted at the end of the webinar for our efforts on continuous improvement. Finally, I would like to call your attention to our upcoming webinars. Later this afternoon, apologies for the timing. Later this afternoon, we will have another session. And on October 25th, we'll have a session on a pivotal year, kindergarten's important role in students' education. November 1st, we'll have a session on identifying and advancing initiatives to accelerate learning recovery. And on November 8th, we will be having a special rebroadcast of an earlier session. We invite for you to stay tuned for information on how to register and encourage you to vote. We hope that you can join us now. All links will be posted in the chat box, and we hope you can join us. Joining you now is Becky Miles-Polka, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you so much, Sierra, and welcome to everyone. And thanks for joining us today for this Funder to Funder conversation, co-funding models to support local and statewide GLR efforts. And today's conversation is really going to focus on the unique relationships that funders have with grade level reading initiatives. We will hear from leaders from 3 different states with 3 different models of supporting and funding these grade level reading efforts. While the models will vary across the 3 states and local communities, the consistent engagement and partnership of funders has been essential to the expansion, success, and sustainability of local and statewide campaigns. The Campaign for Grade Level Reading has challenged philanthropy to think strategically around investments in early school success for children, especially in economically challenged families, and the critical roles that they play in helping to support the ultimate goal of all children reaching their full potential. I'm honored to welcome today's panel of leaders. I will briefly introduce each of them and remind everyone to check the detailed bios that will be posted shortly in the chat box. Sierra, if you want to go ahead and advance the slide. So we'll start with Terri Clark, was appointed the Arizona Literacy Director for the state of Arizona in 2012. As the state literacy director, Terri leads Read on Arizona, a public-private partnership of agencies, philanthropic organizations, and community stakeholders committed to creating an effective continuum of supports to improve language and literacy outcomes for Arizona's children from birth through age 8. And joining Terri today from Arizona will be Erin Goodman, who is the program officer at the Virginia G. Piper Trust, where she manages the Trust's arts and culture grant-making portfolio. She also co-manages the Trust's responsive education, health, and human services grant-making portfolios, and oversees a number of collaborative efforts and special programs. Kari McCann-Boutell is the president of the Iowa Council of Foundations, where she oversees program development and management, membership recruitment and retention, as well as education development and outreach for the purposes of strengthening and growing philanthropy in Iowa. And last but not least is Susan Patrick. She is the Director of Childhood Success at the United Way of Southwest Virginia and a Southwest Virginia native with over 25 years experience working in the field of early care and education as a classroom teacher and administrator, a teacher trainer, and a university professor. I'm now going to turn it over to Kari, who's going to share a little bit about the Iowa story. And in all transparency, my partner, Kari, I've had the good pleasure of working with her for the past going on 8 years on the grade level reading work in Iowa. So I'm really excited for her to share this story, how the council has entered into and sustained the work here. So Kari, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Becky. Good morning, good afternoon, based on where you're at. Good to see everyone. As Becky shared, my name is Kari McCann-Boutell. I'm president of the Iowa Council of Foundations, a statewide network serving charitable funders in our state. And I celebrated my 7th anniversary at ICoF last week. So ever since I joined, we've been engaged in this work with the Iowa Campaign for Grade Level Reading, the national campaign, and Becky has absolutely been a wonderful partner to engage with in supporting this work. So what we did at the end of last year was capped off 8 years of grant-funded support for the Iowa Campaign for Grade Level Reading. And that was funding support that the Iowa Council of Foundations received from an anonymous donor to support sort of the network collaboration and peer learning that happens across our campaign communities in Iowa. And so we wrote a report to share both about what we've learned through our work with the Iowa Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and hopefully to sustain some of the momentum that we've gained around collective impact models, because we think much of what we learned through this work is applicable, of course, to the campaign and early school success work, but can be applied in many other bodies of work as well, which we've started to see in our state. So on the next slide, I'll just share with you the questions that we kind of started out thinking about when this work really began in 2013, before I joined the Iowa Council of Foundations. So there were several funders who were participating in an affinity group of the Iowa Council of Foundations, and it was the ICoF Education Funders Network. And they had been meeting periodically for several years, really just to provide updates to their peers about things that they were supporting in the education space. At that time, I worked at a community foundation and was participating in that network. But in 2013, they decided to come together for an exploration together about what it may look like to invest in co-funding around an education priority. So they came around that question, and then later that issue being the Campaign for Grade Level Reading model. So once they decided that the Iowa Campaign for Grade Level Reading is what they wanted to fund, we looked at different ways that they could do that in collaboration, and that's how this work really evolved over the last 8 years. We wanted to better understand what happened when funders could align their strategies around shared goals, and also what would happen if we supported those goals both with grant making resources, but also with that more than money philanthropy that the intro video talked about. So how are we investing our time, our skills, and our leadership capacities to advance the work as well? So we'll talk a little bit more about what that looked like. We were also really curious if there was a value add in having the Iowa Council of Foundations as a PSO or philanthropy serving organization, really sitting in this role to leverage other regional and national funding that may not be available to local campaign communities, and how we could use that connector or opportunity broker role that we think about at our organization to help advance this work even further. So we'll talk about that more in a bit as well. And then finally, really what I think is one of the most special things about the campaign is what happens when organizations really choose to invest in this long game or take this longer view to support a specific issue or priority. And that I think has been one of the most exciting things that I have witnessed, is that 8 years later, our funders are still investing in this work. They may be using different strategies than they were at the beginning of the 8-year process, but that deep level of commitment has been really encouraging for us to see in our state. So a quick look back on the next slide at that process in 2013, which was that exploration of what people wanted to focus on. So 10 members of the ICoF Ed Funders Network were both looking at the models and then the issues that they wanted to come together around. And they used some definitions by Grant Makers for Effective Organizations, or GEO, about several different co-funding strategies that could be used to support this work. And they decided on two. The first is targeted co-funding, where funders are deliberately but independently making grants to do the same program, to support the same organization, or to fund a certain issue. And so that's what it looked like in the state of Iowa, where we didn't have everyone investing in a pool, for example, and then us redistributing those dollars. People were targeting their funding efforts locally and deliberately, but independently of each other, because there is a lot of place-based philanthropy in Iowa, and that made good sense for our local funders to be investing in their communities that they knew best. The other co-funding strategy that this work really reflects is strategic alignment. So all the funders who participated signed an MOU, and that was their agreement to work toward these shared goals, to report on their work to the Iowa Council of Foundations, all in pursuit of the common goal, the goal being all of the campaign goals and strategies that we are learning from the national campaign. So participating funders made the commitments that you'll see along the bottom of the screen. I'm not going to walk through each of those, but this relationship between the Iowa Council of Foundations and our members who signed those MOUs really was, it had to work both ways. It wasn't just ICoF pushing information and resources out. We really relied on our members and our local funders to share information and knowledge back with us to better inform our strategies, but also to support our grant reporting for the funding that we receive from an anonymous donor. On the next slide, I'll share just a quick snapshot, and I know Becky shared the link in the chat to our full report, so you can look in this, but this is really the success of the work over 8 years. So one of the priorities was to double the number of Iowa campaign communities. We achieved that. We grew from 6 campaign communities to 15. We reached 61 school districts through that network and served 7 of the 10 largest districts in the state of Iowa. And looking at that data, that told us that we were serving over half of the low-income children in the Iowa campaign for GLR communities. We leveraged a significant amount of partners and volunteers to support the work. We also engaged almost half of our Iowa Council of Foundations network members in supporting the work. That maybe was at a local level where they were investing directly in their campaign, but even statewide funders either invested through ICoF or through those local funders to directly support work in the campaign communities across the state as well. In total, we leveraged over $47 million in local, regional, and national public and private funds through the Iowa Campaign for Grade Level Reading through that 8-year period. And that leverage continues to happen since we published our report, so that number continues to grow. On the next page or slide, another snapshot of some of the success. So those of you in the campaign network know what an honor it is to receive Pacesetter Awards. Iowa has historically done a really incredible job of earning that recognition, and even the number 44 has grown as of this past summer. So we probably should get that updated, Becky, in the electronic version of the report. The state of Iowa itself was also recognized twice with Pacesetter Awards. We have a number of All-America City Award finalists and award winners, several Bright Spot honors for Iowa communities and Iowa communities that were included in the 2021 National Campaign Practice Briefs. So we know that is those are nice recognitions, but we also saw these kinds of recognitions really fuel and accelerate the success of Iowa campaign communities. So if an Iowa community received a Pacesetter, we thought the Iowa Council of Foundations about ways to better connect those strategies to other communities in Iowa. So there was a lot of peer sharing and promising practice work that happened to accelerate change in other parts of the state. On the next slide, you will see some of our specific co-funding outcomes. So I mentioned the investment of public and private dollars to support the work. And also shared earlier, this long-term strategy commitment was a different type of investment than many of our Iowa funders had made in the past. And the fact that that is continuing to sustain today is really encouraging to me, especially as we think about the layering of challenges that are facing young kids across the country. And we're certainly seeing that here in our state as well as we move through this phase of the pandemic. So I think it's really taught our funders and especially board members and grant committee members the importance of staying deeply invested in strategies that take that sustained funding to make change and create difference. We also saw funders engaging in a variety of different ways and playing new roles in that more than money philanthropy role. So we'll talk about that more in just a moment. And then finally, while funders were committed to supporting local projects, the participants reported that it was actually that peer sharing and the networking with other places across the state that helped advance their work and accelerate their efforts. So there's a quote here from one of the funders that shared, "The strength of the network is really being able to take a step back or above to see what did we learn that we can carry into other collective impact work." So I think there's been a lot of ripple effect impact of this work, both for the campaign communities, but even into other strategies that they're executing on in their communities. The next slide is a look at the 5 strategies that we use to organize our work. In the middle is the shared goals that we articulated in our anonymous donor grant application. So those were the things that we tracked over time. But the 5 outer circles are the ways that we hope to do that. So the first was through training and capacity building. This was ongoing peer learning, technical assistance, national technical assistance. Many of those opportunities were things that we were able to leverage because of our relationship with the national campaign and national campaign partners. We also use some of the resources from our grant to provide mini grant funding to support the local campaign communities, awarding a little over $130,000 to Iowa communities. Those were dollar for dollar match. So that right there leveraged $130,000 in matching funds. That helped local communities invest in marketing campaigns, get book distribution programs off the ground, attend grade level reading week, other national convenings and conversations as well. So that was a really great way to help invest in the people power behind some of the local campaigns, which was absolutely paying huge dividends throughout the scope of this work. We also did data collection and reporting, both in terms of the grant requirements, but also to support state level data collection and reporting across the communities. And that helped with a lot of our legislative conversations as well. I've mentioned the peer learning and technical assistance. This continues to happen on a monthly basis. And Becky leads and champions that work for us on an ongoing basis, and also supports communities in a variety of different ways through her coaching and support. And then the final circle there is advocacy and partnerships. So we hosted several state advocacy days at the Iowa State Capitol. We really strengthened partnerships with other policy players that had priorities that were intersecting with the campaign for grade level reading priorities in the state. And some really great outcomes happened from that. I'm not going to have time to get into all of that today, but I think moving funders into a mobilization and an advocacy space around an issue was another great muscle that we learned how to flex through this work. On the next slide, I'll detail just some of those new roles that funders started to play throughout the course of this work. So obviously, traditionally, funders play this grant maker role, and that was the most frequently reported role from our members who participated in this work. So from the left of the slide to the right is the frequency with which people reported playing these roles. We also saw a number of funders playing this coalition builder role. So how are they bringing partners and stakeholders together to their local campaign for grade level reading table? Some funders played the backbone role, providing that back office infrastructure support for their communities. A number of funders continue to play those backbone roles in their communities today. We also saw funders fundraising. This was sort of a natural hat for our community foundations to wear, but we even saw some private and corporate foundation folks engaging with their local campaigns to help leverage and solicit additional dollars to support their work. A learning agent, a communicator, a policy advocate, a system realigner. All of these roles really help to support the overall collective work of the local campaign communities. And I think when we talk about that acceleration, I don't know that funders would have been able to play all these roles as well as they did if they weren't learning from their peers who are also playing similar roles in their communities. So this is absolutely the piece of the work that I, in my role as a philanthropy serving organization leader, am most excited about. We obviously in philanthropy have limited resources. Philanthropy in Iowa has limited resources and restricted resources in terms of our place-based nature. So this really pushed and elevated funders into new ways that they could lead community leadership work. And we're seeing it paid huge dividends, both in the campaign success, but also, as I mentioned several times, in other bodies of work as well. So this is quite exciting to me and something that we've seen persist in the network. And then finally, and I'll ask maybe Becky to get her spotlight back on so she can add anything that she would like to. On the last slide here, just an update on where we're at now. So in the summer of 2020, we had about 18 months of the funding remaining. So what we did was two things. We engaged the Iowa Campaign for a Grade Level Reading Network, primarily through the campaign leads, but also the funders who were investing in the work, to understand what their ongoing needs were and how best to support them. So they decided that they wanted to have a home for the Iowa Campaign for Grade Level Reading. For the past 8 years, ICoF has kind of served as that home. So we're currently in conversations to figure out who that next home and that right partner may be for that work. And then alongside those conversations, we re-engaged the ICoF Education Funders Network to begin exploring with them if there are new ways that they want to come together around co-funding projects in Iowa. Maybe it continues to be the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Maybe there's another kind of focus strategy that they wanted to invest in. What we heard from everyone is we're still really engaged in our Campaign for Grade Level Reading. So they asked for time to really think about that question. So we've built in some time in our calendar just to kind of pause on the ICoF side of this work to let people get a better sense and more clarity around where they want to head in terms of the ICoF Ed Funders Network from here. So I think I'll stop there, and Becky would love to have you share anything else that I maybe missed, and a special hello to all the Iowa folks on the webinar today. I see a number of you on the participant list.
Well, thanks, Kari, and thanks for providing that overview. It's really such an extraordinary report, and we posted the link to both this report as well as the early report of the conversation that ICoF had before they entered into this role with the Iowa campaign. And I would say it really has been an extraordinary 8 years working together. It's a little bit like we're leaving the nest, if you will, the comfort of the nest with the Iowa Council Foundations, and then searching out for, which college we're going to go to in a way. So we've been interviewing other partners to find a more permanent home, but ICoF hasn't gone away. So Kari and I still connect regularly, the supporting on being on the webinar, the monthly calls that we have, and we just keep continuing to share resources. And we would not have had the success that we've had with the expansion of the campaign in Iowa or the terrific work that has happened in the local communities without this relationship. So I just want to say special thanks to Kari for sharing this. We're going to move on now to Arizona and hear a bit about how the work in Arizona unfolded. And we will have plenty of time for questions as we move through the conversation today. So Terri and Erin, if you'd like to take the baton, and let's hear about what's happened in Arizona.
Sure.
Sure. Thanks, Becky. I'll start, and Erin is going to give her perspective and an important contribution and participation as a key funder. But overall, just similarly, back in 2013, so we're about to turn 10 years old, Partners in Read on Arizona, they really take that collective impact approach to improving language and literacy outcomes for Arizona's children birth through the age of 8. Really focusing on accelerating school readiness and third grade reading proficiency. What we did at the very onset of Read on Arizona is looked at the 6 founding partners, which were the Arizona Department of Education, First Things First, which is our early childhood education agency, the Head Start State Collaboration Office, and the Arizona Community Foundation, the Helios Education Foundation, and of course, Virginia G. Piper Charitable Trust were the 6 founding partners. And we have added to that in leadership role agencies including the State Board of Education, the Governor's Office of Education, and several additional philanthropic community organizations and key literacy stakeholders. And they really come together to help and serve on an advisory board that oversees the Read on Arizona initiative. And we play that backbone function role, providing data, providing communications, helping to build capacity at the state level as well as at the local level. Read on Arizona includes a network of over 25 local Read on communities throughout the state. Each of those local communities work with a wide array of local stakeholders, including schools and school districts, early childhood organizations, local government, early learning programs, businesses, faith communities, and nonprofit community partners that work directly with families. And each applies that same strategic approach of collaboration around shared goals, shared priorities, to essentially coordinate and maximize their local community collective efforts. So again, you've heard, similar to Iowa, collaboration is key. We focus on a few key principles that guide our work and guide the advisory board in helping us shape the direction of the state initiative. We have an ongoing commitment of state and local partners. Our 6 founding partners all share an originating MOU that provides what they will do for the initiative and what the initiative will help do to support their efforts. We also make data and data integration and analysis a key part of the work from the beginning. It drives everything that Read on Arizona does. And it really was meant to be a way to help inform and provide data at whatever level, local level, state level, is necessary to help drive better data-informed decisions around what in a community might be some of the key factors or challenges to improving early learning and early literacy. One of the key things that has come out of our data work is this amazing data center called Maplet, which is a population level integrated data system that has data sharing agreements with most of our state agencies and provides data at a local school sort of community level to the county level, to the region, to the state level around not just education data, but health data, census data, and other community data that has been identified. I will just wrap it up and say that we've had a few key successes, just like Iowa can sort of say over the last 8 years. I think some recent successes that we can point to is as I said, our data center certainly one. We just at the beginning of the pandemic, because of our shared priorities, because of the rich and deep collaboration we have with partners, we were able to lead a collaborative federal grant opportunity called the Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant for Arizona. And that led to $20 million in over 5 years to help really support and bring resources to the shared plan that partners had been working towards. So we were very excited by that. We also developed 2 years ago an early literacy policy framework that really helped, again, to articulate not just the strategies and priorities, but the policies and resources necessary to really see us gain momentum in improving early literacy. And that policy framework is shared by, again, all of our partners, and has resulted so far in the last 2 years in legislation being passed, and also over $100 million in new investments for early literacy by the governor's office, by our Arizona Department of Ed and the Department of Economic Security, leveraging a number of their ARPA and relief dollars. And then most recently, this last January, a culminating sort of coordination and sort of demonstration of the great collaboration we have between and amongst our funders was that there was a collaborative investment made by 4 of our funding partners, Virginia G. Piper Charitable Trust, the Helios Education Foundation, the Steele Foundation, and the Burton Family Foundation, made an investment of $2.8 million in Read On Arizona to support building our own capacity in providing those backbone functions that are so critical to the collective impact work. And to really, the reason behind that at this point in time was to build the capacity so that Read On could actually meet the demand that was being, that had come about from the pandemic. So that is one, example of a tremendous coordinated and co-funding opportunity that has helped us to build our capacity. And then the last, which I know we'll talk about in a little bit later, was that we also have put together a sustainability work group for Read On Arizona, made of both our agencies and our philanthropic partners. And together they have adopted a shared sustainability framework from going forward from 2023 to 2030 about how to increase and sustain resources needed for the field at large around early literacy, but also for the collective impact initiative of Read On Arizona. So really proud of the great work and the great collaboration that's happening in Arizona, and so excited that Erin Goodman is here from Piper Trust to be able to share her perspective, because they have been a lead funder and a key partner from the inception. Erin?
Thanks, Kari. Yeah, that was a really great description of all of our involvement. Yeah, I'm happy to represent our perspective as a core funder. I've been with Piper Trust almost since the beginning of Read On Arizona. I think Terri had just been hired as the director, and Read On had just launched when I joined the trust in early 2014. And so it's been great to watch that initiative grow and sort of see the ebbs and flows of the work and all of the ways that things have changed here, our landscape in Arizona, and particularly here related to our work as a funder. So as Terri said, Piper Trust was one of the founding partners. We, 2 of our primary interests as a place-based funder are in early childhood and in academic supports. So this was a really natural fit for us. We have always, since the trust's inception, played a large role in those 2 funding areas here in Maricopa County, which is the largest county in, or the most populous county in Arizona, where Phoenix is located. And so we've always had kind of an outsized impact on that kind of work. And so it was a natural fit for us to be a core funder and be at the table. And so as Terri said, we've really committed to being a long-term backbone funder to support the backbone. But as staff and program officers of the trust, we're always also looking for ways to align our other work. Not everything we do is directly related or impacting Read On's primary strategies, but we're always looking for ways that we can align our other funding to the primary goals of Read On, and to also help attract and direct attention of our colleagues in philanthropy to what's going on at Read On Arizona. So there are lots of ways that we meet with other funders who maybe don't see themselves as education funders. And so they are not naturally attracted to the work of Read on Arizona. The word early literacy maybe doesn't mean that much to them, but there are ways that we can help shape their thinking about the importance of school readiness and everything that happens in children and family supports. Protective factors framework can have some impact, all kinds of different ways that our colleagues are working in the areas that are adjacent to literacy, and we can help to kind of draw attention and try to keep people aligned with what's going on with Read On, so that we're all pulling in the same direction, even if we're not directly involved in education or early literacy. So yeah, so it's exciting for me to try to connect the dots between all of our other grant making that we do, and also bring other funders along into the conversation whenever possible.
Thank you, both Terry and Erin. It's really exciting to have been part of the, I've been part of the campaign for almost a decade, and to watch the work unfold in Arizona. And I think the structure around it, we're going to hear a little bit more when I have some questions for our panelists about the sustainability planning from Arizona, which I think is also a really thoughtful and exciting part of the work as it continues to unfold there. We're going to transition now to West Virginia and have Susan share a little bit about what's going on there. Feel free to ask questions for any of our presenters after Susan's done. I have a few questions for our panelists, and then we'll open it up for your questions as well. So jot them down, put them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them. So Susan, please.
Sure, thanks, Becky. And just to clarify, it is Virginia, it's Southwest Virginia, not Southwest Virginia. We get that a lot, believe me. So I am here representing the United Way of Southwest Virginia, which, if you know a lot about United Way organizations, we're typically known as a funder, a grant funder. So we take in local donations and we provide funding out to the community for different initiatives. About 15-ish years ago, our organization really took a deep look at the impact that we were having on our community, and the places where we were putting funding and the focus that we had. And what we really discovered was that as we were doing wonderful things in the community and really providing a lot of community support, this kind of support that we were giving was not forward thinking. It was really looking to solve an immediate problem, what's happening right now. And so during that time, our board elected to work towards becoming more of a collective impact organization. So much of what these ladies have already talked about here today, about really focusing around a couple of main initiatives, positioning yourself in a way that you can make long-term change, and you can focus your capacity and your resources in a way that still impacts the community, still has huge repercussions for all those around you, but might not solve today's immediate problem. So we serve 21 cities and counties across the southwestern tip of Virginia, which is about 20% of the state. Obviously, when you think about that, it's about 7,000 square miles of area. It's very rural. So the partnerships and work that we do to build relationships is really foundational to all of our work. We've focused around the three areas that many of you, as I said before, if you're familiar with United Way work, you know that we work around health, education, and financial stability for people. And we continue to stay in that vein, but really think about where can we make the biggest impact. And for our organization, we settled on a cradle to career continuum. So we work across that continuum from birth and even pre-birth all the way through until you enter the workforce. So the Childhood Success Team, which is the team that I manage here at United Way, has a number of different initiatives that we work on, but they're all focused around that really early school success. We want to make sure that children have access to really high quality early education experiences, that they have the family resources available to them that are needed for a family who, of course, is the child's first teacher, to know and understand what their child needs to be successful. So we initially started out as a Smart Beginnings community early on in our work. I wrote down in my notes here as I was listening to the other ladies speak that we're the baby of these presenters today. We have only been working on the campaign for grade level reading since 2018 and have served as a state lead since 2020. So obviously we had some really good momentum going there in our first 2 years and had a little setback early in 2020, as most folks did. And we're really kind of getting back on track with figuring out how to position all these primary strategies around school readiness, really foundationally support all the work of Campaign for Grade Level Reading. So reminding ourselves and really coming back to the idea that ultimately we want to be creating a community of really good citizens, which includes being a really good reader. We are always looking at not just the academic success of children, but also focusing around their physical and mental health as well. So we launched an initiative called the Trauma Informed Schools Initiative. This work, while it doesn't seem like it really necessarily contributes to reading success, it does if you think about the fact that a child needs a positive environment in which to learn. They need to be fed. They need to be received at school in a way that feels welcoming to them. And they need to have connections with teachers and other peers. So we've focused a lot of our work in the last 2 years in response to the pandemic around taking care of the mental health of those children and the faculty that work with them. We've continued to work around learning loss and recovery, including the launch of kindergarten camps in 2021, which served at-risk rising kindergartners. So those children who had not had a preschool experience or who had not had a high quality preschool experience before their kindergarten year. We've seen really great results from that. A lot of great feedback from people who said they cried the first week of kindergarten camp, and by the time they came to school, they were over that transition of being out of their home and into a group setting, which gave them that little bit of edge that they needed for those first few weeks of kindergarten to settle in. We expanded that program in 2022 to include tutoring supports. So now those rising kindergartners who were at risk on day one of kindergarten, they have a 3-week camp before kindergarten starts, and then they have additional tutoring supports that go on throughout the school year to give them that strong foundation in their kindergarten year. Kari mentioned a lot about the long-term commitment and changes that occur over time. And like I said, we're the baby of the presenters today. We've only been at this work for a few years. So I feel like in some ways, I don't have as much to offer as all of these wonderful presenters who've been here today, but I have a whole lot to learn from them. I really loved the graphic that Kari showed that showed the sort of wavy lines around the circles of how you have to position yourself as a funder and all the different roles that you have to play as a campaign community to really make this all work. You have to be that coalition builder. You have to kind of hustle to get your, as I like to call it, our army. We have to get our army together to take on this challenge that's ahead of us. And so the importance of building that shared governance among all of our partners. And again, we're very rural. So that means, you know, I might drive 2 hours to have a 30-minute meeting with somebody, but that's critically important to our work in that relationship building. I love that Terri talked a lot about positioning around the data. This is where I feel like we are going to make our leaps and bounds forward. We've just recently hired someone to be completely dedicated to data collection and analysis for our community. So that data work, when you're talking about how health and school academic data and resources in the community, how all of that feeds together and talks about, you know, kind of the profile of a county or the profile of a town. How well is that town really providing all those resources? What is their health rating? What kind of reading initiatives do they have going on? Those kinds of things, that resource mapping, that's kind of where we're at right now, is looking at how do we expand and understand the communities that we serve. It's a lot about capacity building. So a lot of work around who's going to do this work, how are we going to get it done, the volunteers that we need. And as we reach out to other communities across Virginia and learn from them, in particular, our Star Reads community in the Roanoke area is an amazing community for the campaign, who's been active for a long time, and we've learned so much from them about how to partner with different organizations to really push this work forward and build our own internal capacity. So as I mentioned before, we've really focused a lot around early childhood initiatives, and the whole state of Virginia is moving towards that. And there has been a huge focus around this idea of really the most coordinated effort around early childhood that our state has ever seen. It's called the Ready Region Initiative. So 9 Ready Regions across the state of Virginia have been named. So they have a backbone organization and they serve a certain area of the state. And they are charged with making sure that all children, all families within that region have access to and can utilize high quality early childhood education experiences, that all teachers that are working with children birth to 5 are being observed and given feedback on their interactions with children that can build language and literacy, and all of these things that, again, foundationally lead to building good readers. So as we serve as that Ready Region Southwest lead agency here, we really take that seriously, and we embed all of that, our campaign for grade level reading understanding and that work in with our early childhood work, so that we hopefully will be able to diversify that and to really reach everyone. And as one of our presenters earlier mentioned, sometimes when you say early literacy, it doesn't speak to someone. But if you can say school readiness, if you can say kindergarten camp, that sounds really fun. If you can say trauma-informed care in a school, these different initiatives speak to people in different ways. So being able to stay focused around our main goal while still reaching different populations, I think, is one of our strategies for sustainability. I think I've pretty much taken up my time, but thank you so much for listening, and for the other presenters who've shared their wonderful work today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan, and apologies for the Virginia, West Virginia mix-up.
It happens all
I've
the
done
time.
that more than once. Yeah, so
Yeah,
okay.
it happens all the time because we're Southwest Virginia.
Yes. So I think if we'll have all of our speakers, panelists come off mute video, and we'll have a conversation. And also, while we're doing this, you put your questions in the Q&A. I know we had one attendee who had his hand up, Lorenzo. So if you have a question for our panelists, please put that in Q&A. I'm going to start with a couple questions that I have and ask our panelists to respond to those. And anybody can take these. We'll just have this be, a kitchen table conversation. So I'm going to start with Kari mentioned the various kind of roles that funders can play and on one of her slides, or have played in their campaign efforts. And I'd like to hear from you how you navigate these various roles and hats that you each must wear: funder, convener, backbone, collective impact lead, etc. So I might start with Erin on this one. Erin, share a little bit more.
Interesting. So yeah, I definitely wear several different hats. As I said, I manage a lot of our responsive grant making in children and in education. And in that, wearing that hat, I have to think about all of the trust's priorities and all of the various opportunities that are out there in the community that may not be necessarily aligned with literacy, but are hopefully not working against our priorities in literacy. And that's kind of one of the things I'm always looking for. And then in my role on the Read On Advisory Committee, that is the group of the core partners. And so in that, wearing that hat, I'm thinking directly about what are the priorities of Read On, how can we support these strategies, how can we further the work of Read On, and how can we, as I said before, how can we keep drawing attention to the progress that's being made in Read On and keep getting kind of more collective will behind moving behind that effort. And then I also serve on the sustainability committee for Read On, which is where we're trying to actively garner increased support for those backbone functions and get more folks at the table who are willing to not just support the backbone and join us in that commitment, but also maybe find various ways that they can directly fund some of the work of Read On as we braid funding together to support the various strategies we have as a collective. So it can be really challenging to, when I'm in various conversations out in the community, as a place-based funder, we're out and about quite a lot, and it can be really challenging to keep track of which hat am I wearing in this conversation and how can I best support the work of Read On in this moment. And constantly being mindful of that is important.
Susan, you're in, I think, a really unique role in both serving a regional effort as well as this statewide hat that you play, and your United Way shifting to more of a collective impact model. How do you navigate those various hats that you have to wear?
Delicately. I do think it is a big job. It's a big job, and it's ever changing. You just have to be flexible and willing to walk through doors that are open to you and pound on the ones that are not. I think it just takes a lot of relationship building, a lot of work, making connections with others, and really respecting and understanding where other people are coming from. And while at the same time, you know, trying to share your thoughts and ideas as well. I think that as you expand your services, making sure that you educate folks around you. We've had many people who come to work for our organization and they get here and they say, oh, I didn't know you guys did this. I didn't know you did that. I didn't know you did this. So I think just telling your story and being able to get your information out there and educate people around you makes a huge difference as well. And I won't say we're good at that. I will say we're getting better at that.
All of us, right? Right. Kari,
it's something that
Kari, you know, your ICoF as a philanthropy serving organization. I mean, I think that it's been a really unique role that you've played, keeping abreast of your members' needs. We've had a number of disasters in Iowa over the course of the time that the campaign, and you have other kind of cohort initiatives. So how have you navigated all of that as the president of ICoF?
Well, as Susan would say, we are learning. We have not mastered anything, but I will share a part of the report that we didn't share in the slides today is actually about ICoF's evolving role. So historically, organizations like ours have been called philanthropy serving organizations, as I've mentioned, but there's been this conversation in our national network with our peers around if serving is the right word, right? Are we, you know, just engaging in that transactional kind of relationship with our members, or are we more philanthropy leading organizations really moving and mobilizing our networks to collaborate, think differently, use different tools in their tool belt, if you will. And so I think this campaign for grade level reading work really pushed us more toward this leading space. That leading language didn't quite resonate with me as I think about our network, because we are so homegrown and really deeply connected with our network members. So the language we've been using in our strategic planning just this year with our strategy task force is around philanthropy guiding. So really thinking about the needs of the organizations in our network, but also thinking about ways that we can push and help advance and deepen the work and finding that balance. So we wore and continue to wear a lot of different hats, and it does kind of feel like a grand balancing act, but I think this work helped us think about working in new ways for sure as a PSO.
Thank you. Terri, you and I serve as state leads and have to work with a variety of funders who have varying interests. I think, you know, one of the really exciting things about Arizona is this funding group came together, but how do you navigate those relationships with your different, both private and public funders? And, you know, as a state lead, how do you manage all of that?
Yeah, no, I think that is one of the unique things about Arizona is that we have that agency and philanthropic at the table together side by side, helping to guide the initiative. And I think we talk about it, and the way I navigate is really all of our partners should see themselves in Read on Arizona. Read on Arizona is not a separate entity. We're an extension of all of their work. And we really try to sort of have them help us to accomplish those shared goals. So I think where it gets difficult sometimes is when communication maybe isn't as clear, and so we don't understand what a partner's goals are, or that their goals may have changed. And so, you know, I'm constantly out there. What do I need to understand better about partners? How do I communicate to partners about the shared goals and the shared strategies and where we're headed, so that they can, you know, do what they need to do within their own organization to make sure that goes smoothly. So I think, you know, and again, not just with our philanthropic and not just with our state agencies, but with our local communities, that's constantly, what are their needs? What are their priorities? How can we help them? We have a very intentional state campaign to local campaign communication and support system. And I think that's been one really valuable way of, we don't really think of that as separate work. It's an extension of the broader work. And so, you know, that partnership and that deep collaboration goes both ways, right? What do local communities benefit from being part of that, of Read on Arizona? And we learn a lot at what the needs are at the local level that can then support state policy directions and state resource needs and things like that. So so I'm constantly, like Erin said, sort of changing hats, and which hat do I have on? And I'm putting myself in our local community shoes or a state agency shoes and saying, you know, why is this either challenging, or what more can, you know, what more can we do to help them to fulfill their partnership? Yeah, it's really, it's exciting and challenging at the same time. And I think we've been doing it so long here in Arizona that that we have built a lot of trust. And I think that that's something that, you know, early on in the work, you know, that great quote of change happens at the speed of trust. And I think that is absolutely sort of centered to a lot of how we've been able to accomplish what we've been able to accomplish, is not taking those relationships for granted, and really ensuring that we do what we're going to say, we say what we're going to do, and we meet expectations and deliver on those.
Thank you. You know, when we had a couple of planning calls for this session, we talked, and Erin, I'm going back to your comments about when you're a funder and you're working in a collective impact initiative, and how sometimes that becomes challenging to work with the leadership in your own organization, to work with your board of directors, and how you sometimes have to bend those, you know, bend those rules. I'd love for you to share just a little bit more about how you've navigated that process, and then we're going to get into more of a sustainability conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I think I definitely agree with Terri. Everything she said about trust and relationships is so important. And I think it won't be surprising to anyone on this call to know that anytime you're engaged in this kind of collective impact work, and you're you know, trying to get a lot of diverse stakeholders kind of pulling in the same direction, whether they all agree or not about particular aspects of the work, can be like little p political in some ways. And it's important to be really honest and open about the kinds of dynamics that we are navigating. And I think, you know, one of the big observations that I've made just in the last few years is Becky referred to leadership and various people who've been involved in the work. There's been a lot of leadership change in our sector, in our organization at Piper Trust, and in some of the other core funders. There have been staff changes, people have retired, and that changes the dynamics. It changes the political landscape a little bit. Again, little p political. And you do have to kind of be a little more mindful of where are people coming from here, and how much of this is about relationship and trust and really understanding the ground that we're standing on versus the work itself. And so that just adds another dynamic to the work that we have to always be thinking about. And I think that to the extent that folks are able to just be really open and honest about that with each other, I think it can really help to keep everybody on the same page. Is that getting at what you were looking for?
Yeah. Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Kari, kind of along those same lines, you know, in terms of the relationships with your members that have been part of the Ed Funders group, and, you know, you put in place a formal process with a memorandum of understanding, and ask them to report on the roles that they've been playing, the investments that they've been making. How do you think that has helped or not, you know, over the course of time, sort of keep that relationship strong with those local funders?
Well, I will say all of that was built by my predecessor. So I inherited it and I have benefited from it greatly. And I think our network has benefited from it greatly. What we did was collected all of that through, at the beginning, monthly reporting from our members. And then we moved to quarterly. It just started to make more sense to do it that way. But I think especially in community-based philanthropy work, we just never stop, right? We persist, we are on to the next, we push forward. There's always a million things happening. And just that very simple exercise of monthly and then quarterly reporting to stop and reflect on the work that was happening sustained the effort. You may not have felt like you were consistently engaging in your campaign or funding in your campaign or doing the hard work of coalition building or serving as the backbone. But when people would sit down at their computers to log their work, they would see it reflected on their calendars. They would see it reflected in their grant portfolios. And I think that that built this sense of pride over time in engaging in the work. And then it also helped us to really encourage sustainability across the network, because then we could lift up in a statewide aggregate how much money was continuing to be invested, who the funders were, what types of activities they were engaging in. And that helped you and I build our peer learning agenda, build our national technical assistance and capacity building agenda. So I think, you know, the graphic I had where our goals were in the middle and the 5 different circles, they were all mutually reinforcing types of strategies and supports that fueled the work. And I think if any one of those links had not been as strong, we would have lost people. So I think it was, you know, each of the puzzle pieces coming together.
Thank you. So sustainability, you know, we have, the campaign has been in place for a decade. The work in Arizona has been going on for a decade, and you have really formalized this sustainability planning, as did ICoF, with thinking about, you know, what's next, what's GLR 2.0 in Iowa. But Erin and Terri and Susan, I know you're just a little new, but, you know, we always think about sustainability right from the beginning as well. So feel free to jump in. But Terri and Erin, share with us more about how you formalized this sustainability planning and how you've kept your funding partners, their boards in this, you know, to use a sports metaphor, in the funding and programmatic game for the last decade. And you're doing a plan that's going to take you through 2030. So tell us more about that. We do have some questions in Q&A. We will get to those. So stay with us here. Let's hear about the Arizona sustainability work.
I can share a bit about how that group got started, and then I know Erin has some great examples of how Piper's engaged in that work. So we formalized a sustainability work group about 2 years ago. And again, it includes all of our philanthropic partners and our state agency partners. And we approach it in 2 ways. It's not just about Read on Arizona and the backbone supports and functions. It's also about literacy in the field at large and what we need to see in Arizona in moving forward. And so that group came together and looked at different models, looked at different across the country, some of the strategies and things. And then what we agreed to do was build a sustainability framework with shared goals around around sustainability. They fall into 3 bucket areas, which is none of them are going to be earth-shattering, I'm sure, to the group, anyone on this call. But one is just to ensure that there's a balanced and diverse portfolio of funding sources for the field and how we support early literacy, as well as for the Read on Arizona initiative. The second is around leveraging shared resource development. And we, in the last couple of years, have really seen some success. I mentioned the Comprehensive Literacy State Development Federal Grant. We did some shared resource development around funding use of ARPA dollars. And we have now the ability to bring our local read-on communities and the state read-on initiative together and identify quickly sort of how we want to approach a funding opportunity and leverage that consortium sort of collaboration approach. So that's been very successful, and we want to continue to work in that direction. And then the third is really very much focused on the long-term formalization and ensuring the long-term sustainability of read-on as an initiative. And that was having conversations about how do we do that when funders have a funding cycle of, of 3 years, and what are some ways that we can start to think about the long view, not just the short term. And we pulled our philanthropic partners together, especially, and had conversations about what that could look like. And then we took that feedback back and internalized it into this funding sort of sustainability framework that we just adopted, that will go from to 2030. Erin, did I miss anything? Anything you would add to that? I know you have great examples.
No, I don't. I think you covered everything that I would mention. I think to add to that, one of the ways that I've been starting to think more and more about not just the work, but my particular value add or whatever as a program officer to the greater effort is, I mentioned a little bit earlier how always looking for projects that align with read-on, but are also benefit the work on the whole. And I've started to sort of refer to those internally as sidecar projects. So they might not be something that's explicitly included in the read-on strategy, but it is something that aligns, it contributes, and it might even be something that a particular read-on community within the collective impact model has figured out how to operationalize. And then it's, how do I say, an example is this really awesome program we have in Arizona called Make Way for Books. And this was an early literacy program that started in Southern Arizona, which is in the Tucson market. And they were involved with the read-on community down there, and they have a proven model for helping to support parents and caregivers in early literacy strategies and help to sort of involve them as parents as teachers model, child's first teacher. And once they proved that their model was particularly successful and that they had the cultural competency to work with, in particular, Native and Spanish speaking families, and that is a big gap in a lot of the state and really a struggle here in Maricopa County, then the question for us was, we need Make Way for Books in Maricopa County. How can we work with them to build their own organizational capacity to be able to grow and expand into our most populous county? And then how can we help them be successful as they then expand out from there? So we worked with them to implement a program in one of our star Make Way communities, read-on communities. And we plan to do another expansion grant with them in the coming year as they grow and spread to additional read-on communities up here in the Phoenix area. So there are always these ways to grow literacy stuff and to look for those bright spots and try to invest in those, while we're also in working on the explicitly read-on, checklist of priorities and strategies that we're implementing there. So I think that's been kind of how I think about the work, is always in parallel. It's not either or, hopefully never working against each other, but there are always opportunities to do that and to expand what we're doing.
Susan, anything to add from your perspective? I know you're
I
pretty
think she
new in
said
this.
everything I would have said, which I talked about leveraging funds, diversifying. Those are the notes that I was kind of taking about what I might say. And then looking at resources that are both national, state, and local.
All right, good. We have time. We have plenty of time for questions from you all in the audience. So please feel free to put them in. I have some more, so I'll keep going with those. Erin, there is one in the Q&A box that from Marie O'Brien asking if you've created any systems that help to survive the sustainability of having different people transition in and out.
That is a great question. And yeah, so one thing that I'll say from my personal experience, I mentioned in the last segment that we've had a lot of leadership transition here at Piper Trust and throughout some of the other core partners at READ-ON. But just speaking from Piper Trust perspective, it has been very challenging for me as staff to, I was at the READ-ON table, and then we had a leadership transition and a staff change, and then I was away from the READ-ON table while someone else engaged with READ-ON, and now I'm back at the table and kind of trying to figure things out again. And like I said, with that little p politics, like figuring out the relationships, now there's a different mix of partners at the table, and I need to sort of reestablish relationships and chemistry with a lot of those people, and they don't know me, I don't know them. That can be a real challenge. So I would say whatever your organization can do to and what we've done, you may have noticed in my bio that I kind of do a lot of things now. And one of the things that we did is we started to de-silo our roles. So we have a number of program officers at the trust that are responsible for different funding areas, and the rationale for that is a good one. However, doing that causes there to be various people that need to engage with our collective impact work, whether it's READ-ON Arizona or other projects that we're involved in at different times. And so one change we've made recently is that I will continue to manage, regardless of what core area I'm focused on in our responsive grant making, I will continue to manage our collective impact work going forward, so that we don't have these shifts and changes as somebody retires and a new person comes in, and then we're, filling gaps. And I think anything that you all can do in your organizations to think about that and think about sustainability in terms of sustained attention, sustained involvement, and sustained understanding and commitment, that's also really important. I think the other thing, and this is more of a practical thing, and this is a great system that Terri put in place as our collective impact leader, the leader of the backbone. She put in place a kind of, some of you might be familiar with the board buddy system in governance models, where if a new person comes onto a board, they maybe are assigned kind of a mentor to help them through the first year of their board leadership, to understand some of the conventions, some of the history and habit, things like that. Terri put something similar in place for our advisory committee members. So both for advisory board and sustainability work group, we have the opportunity, and I have, even though I've been involved with READ-ON off and on, like I said, almost since the inception of READ-ON, I now have a buddy who's helping to reorient me to what's going on in the group and help me sort of get re-engaged and develop those relationships and get reconnected with the work. I think that's also a really helpful tool that any of you could try to use to help, help build that continuity. Terri, do you want to say anything maybe about the board buddy system?
No, you did a great job, Erin. And that really was to sort of help to, also give a different perspective, board to board member perspective. The other
Mhm.
thing I will say we do for new board members is we do have an onboarding sort of book, that sort of helps them understand, what they're stepping into, and as Erin said, the history and some of the captures, quickly things, so they have that at their fingertips, and that has been helpful. But I think that Erin's pointing out the board buddy, and just someone to bounce off, hey, I'm finding this really challenging because there's so much going on, and where do I, that somebody to bounce that off of and think that through is really was the intent of it for folks that have been engaged for a while and folks that are brand new. I think that's been helpful.
So I'm curious, I have some thoughts about my work in Iowa, but I'm curious for you all, and Kari and I can talk a little bit about how we shifted, but how did your work shift during the pandemic? And, when there were competing interests in some ways, and deep, the sort of need to really deepen this work, while at the same time, other funders are moving on to new priorities. And so I'm curious on how you shifted, what some of the keepers might have been and are from any shifts that you made. So Susan, I know you shared a little bit about some of the things that you have put in place with kindergarten camp and others. Anything specific in terms of how your work shifted that you're continuing, or?
Yeah, we really just tried to listen to what in particular our school communities were saying. So when they started coming to us and saying, children are out of control, we don't know what to do, we don't know how to serve them, teachers are stressed out, we don't know how to help them be here and be available to children, that's when we started our Trauma Informed Schools initiative. So it was all about listening to what people needed and kind of going to the right funder at the right time and saying, this is what we're hearing from our community. I think when you can bring a funder a really good message of what the community is asking for and really lay out exactly how you're going to address that community problem that has been brought to you, then you have a good foundation for a project that you can launch. And that's kind of what we had to do. We had to navigate based off of what people were asking for, because it wasn't enough anymore just to be doing professional development, which is something we had done a lot of prior to COVID. Now that professional development had to be rooted in self-care for teachers. We had to start every message with, we know it's hard out there. We know that you're going through a lot, and we appreciate you so much for being here and taking your time to learn this new thing that we're giving you. So I think that just being nimble and able to almost like read the room, but on a larger scale, right? To know and understand your communities was very important.
So critical, so very critical. I'm going to shift my hat to my state lead hat on, from moderator hat to state lead, and talk a little bit about some of the shifts we made with our network in Iowa. We typically would meet, 2 to 3 times a year in person for network-wide peer learning events. We had generous funding from an anonymous donor to deepen an engagement with Attendance Works, for example, with Lectio. And then when the pandemic hit, we had to quickly pivot to change our model, which we moved to twice a month calls with our network, just to, get all hands on deck, learning about how each community, we have a range of communities from small rural to population centers in Iowa, and how are each of the communities addressing pandemic needs. We have a lot of agricultural and meatpacking industry in the state. And so, we had to look at how we supported our network in supporting their communities. And so we made that shift. And for about 9 months, we're having twice a month calls. And then since then, the keeper is that we've shifted to a once a month peer learning model. And Kari, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
The only thing I would add, and we talked about this a lot, Becky, in the very early days of the pandemic, which feels like a lifetime ago now. It's just we've talked a lot about trust and relationships, but that served communities in so many different ways. The fact that these collective impact models had already been built in communities and could be activated to support whatever need was emerging in a community was just really, really pretty incredible to witness. So for sure, it was food in the early days, right? So many campaign communities organized around food, got it in backpacks, got it in cars, got it wherever it needed to go. But then it was Wi-Fi, right? Like there was always this emergent need, and it seemed the networks were readily prepared to meet those needs. And I have thought in the past, like, we would have really, really, really been hurting if those networks didn't exist. Kids would have really, really, really been hurting. Not that they didn't hurt enough. But thinking about our disaster philanthropy work that we're engaged in at the Iowa Council of Foundations as well, this was a bright spot, right? That these sort of infrastructure networked relationships were already built. And I think that this will serve us well for decades.
Yeah. Really, really important point. How about Erin and Terri, in terms of pivots that you had to make, things that you've continued to hold on to that you learned in that process?
I think one of the big pivots that we have been underway for a couple of years now is around strategic learning, not just from our partners in the state, but partners out in other states. That started with the learning exchange with the state of Mississippi, just at around the beginning of the pandemic, which was so helpful to us as we thought about our response to the pandemic. And then we are currently underway with our second learning exchange with the state of Florida. And that has been, again, already so helpful and fruitful to think about guiding our work and where we need to think about as we move into 2023. So I think just, again, that really a time and attention to not just listening, but also the collective and the collaborative inquiry process and that strategic learning process for all of our partners at the table at the state and local level has been a big shift.
Mm-hmm.
We're really sort of deepening that in the last few years.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Terri. Oh, go ahead, Erin, please.
No, it's okay. It's okay, Becky, go ahead.
Oh, no, please, go ahead.
I was gonna really try to highlight Terri's perspective. I think that my perspective, we at Piper Trust were in a very, very unique situation in the last couple of years. And so I'm aware that sharing what we've done is not necessarily useful to others. So we were very fortunate that our trustees made a strategic decision to go way over and above our normal payout during the pandemic. So not only did we not shift direction or feel that we had divided attention during a crisis, which many organizations did. Of course, they moved from one priority to another, just trying to keep everybody afloat. Our trustees put out every dollar that we earned during the pandemic, which was record-breaking market profits, put back into the community. So during those 2 years, we awarded, I don't know, $175 million, and our normal payout is like 22 million. So it was a very unique experience to be able to kind of do everything. And I get that that's not doable for most on the call, but one thing I can share that I think was that I'm proud of that we did is we really tried to focus on all that would be lost if we did not keep our eye on the prize. And, you know, it was very tempting to go after food security, to go after, you know, all of the kind of immediate needs. But we also made huge strategic investments in mental and behavioral health of young students, supporting the childcare industry. We just made a huge investment in trying to prop up our childcare industry, which is, you know, quite a challenge at the moment. Other big strategic things, in addition to providing Wi-Fi, getting food to kids, getting books to households, making sure that people had diapers and healthcare and all those things. So I get that it's not for everybody, but we were very fortunate to be able to kind of do it all.
Well, thank you. And yes, and your community benefited from that so deeply. So we are at the top of the hour. I can't believe it. This went so fast. And I just want to really thank our panelists. I know Kari had to jump off to get on another session that she is on. And I know that Susan, Erin, and Terri all made their schedules work so they could be here with us today. And I want to really thank our ASL interpreters, Judy and Jana, and as well as my colleagues, Sierra Sanchez, who's been working in the background, and Sarah Torian, who helps pop things in chat as well. We hope you join us for some upcoming webinars, and posted the registration, and those do come out in our weekly GLR Learning Tuesdays newsletter. So thank you all for being here today. You will get all the resources, and the recording and the slides will be coming out later this week yet. So thank you so much.